Hey, good afternoon. This is Ricky Rye from Traditions Training. Welcome to Fire Engineering Humpday Hangout with the Traditions Training crew today. We got Sammy Hittle, Larry Schultz, and Donny Fletcher on. A couple of our other instructors are working today, and we're going to join in, but got called out on runs. They say they're busy, so they're out there doing runs out there today. So, but hey, we're only it's getting pretty close to FDIC. I know. Larry and Sammy are heading out that way. I'm certainly going to attempt to get out that way, hopefully. But so I haven't, we're trying. Bobby Halton is going to be away, not going to be able to attend today, so we can't get that update that we normally get for FDIC. But certainly, I would say that people are starting to looking forward to it. I hadn't even looked at what the weather's going to be like out there, so I don't think we're going to be in coats and heavy coats and freezing on the walk back from the restaurant. So I imagine it's going to be a little warm out there. So, but hey, we'll kind of get started on the topic, jump right into it and get going and see where we land today. I was just trying to, is that just to where we're at with complacency. And, I kind of bring that up, and it can be whether it be the firefighter, whether it be a company officer, whether it be a chief officer, whether it be the fire department in general. It's just that just seeing some of that in recent months, and people being complacent or not ready to do what they want to do when they show up. We have some. Donny and I have in our department. We had some pretty graphic video that can't be shown on any type of social media unless Donny and I want to get fired, of an auto accident where a single company and an EMS unit gets dispatched to an auto accident, and they pull up and the car is on fire. Somebody's trapped inside, and is burning up. The victim did survive, but I would say that was just due to the fact that the company did not let complacency come into play. So every auto accident. Full PPE, it doesn't care if it's 100 degrees outside, they're going to be in full PPE and ready to go to work. And I would say that's not the case, for any department across the country. It all depends on what your department does. I mean, and what you're willing to accept. I mean, I as I told the ops chief, I said, can you imagine if we showed up on video with no gear on and then had to go back and get gear on and then get back and get our SCBA and then go attack this fire while the civilian, suffers even more injuries and possible death. And that's a pretty dramatic one, I would have to say. But because this stuff happens every day, on every little fire, every little call, every little smoke in the building. Is it how well we're prepared for that, and who's actually responsible for that? Mine is that, and Chief Schultz and I, 5 years ago now, or 6 years ago, 7 years ago, got into a huge discussion about just how much we depend on that company officer as chiefs, and how we prepare them, how they operate in their companies, and how they manage their people to avoid this complacency. So, before I throw it to Chief Schultz, I know I have some good comments, and we're going to go to a company officer when he gets done drinking a cup of coffee. And just, I know Sammy is not a complacent officer. If you've ever watched Sam's mind work, you know that is a scary place to be. So, Sammy, have you been in a company that's been complacent?
Yeah, I definitely have, mostly as a firefighter. But because it comes back to what you were saying, as an officer, I'm in a place where I can say what's acceptable and what's not. As a firefighter, I had to try to lead from the bottom. I had officers that wouldn't dress out the way they should, but that didn't mean that I wouldn't. And ultimately what that did for me was build habits to where when you get later in your career and you do get to the point where you're like, yeah, do I really need to put a coat on? Do I really want to wear an air pack for this? You do it out of habit.
So, so now that you were a firefighter, you worked from the bottom, now, you've served as a lieutenant. Yeah. You're serving as a captain. So, it's easy to dictate that. Dictate's probably a strong word. You set the expectation is probably the correct word. So, how do your firefighters take that, knowing that, maybe there's 2 or 3 complacent companies around, not specifically in your department, and they don't have to do what you do?
Oh, that's where I would say, I don't know. In theory, it's easy. In practice, it's more difficult because you've got to reinforce those expectations with discipline or some tough talks. You're not always going to be somebody's friend when you have to pull them to the side and say, "Hey, this is unacceptable." I can give one example. When I first got over to as a new captain to my first assignment, we had a firefighter who was not dressing out appropriately. I addressed it with him several times, and in his performance appraisal, I marked him down, and he took it very personal. He was very insulted, but we had that tough talk, and he fixed the problem and actually became one of my favorite firefighters to work with. But it required me to not be worried about being a friend and more so doing my job.
Donnie, you look like you had a head nod there. So.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Sam. In Sam's instance, it goes back to not having poor leadership. Sam was brave enough to pull that guy aside and lead by example and set the tone. The way it's complacency, particularly in this time of year. It's easy this time of year. It's hot out. We don't want to put our gear on. We're running the same, bells call or traffic accident where it seems as minor as possible. But, we have to, we're there to operate. We're there to work. It's, and it takes a good company officer or good discipline on a backstep firefighter's, on his shoulders to say like, hey, no matter what, I don't care that we just got back from this same exact AFA, we're going to put our gear on every single time. And it's not even so much just that, hey, we're going to pull up on that same exact one that we've already run 2 or 3 times. And there's going to be fire coming out of the top floor, but it's the next one. If I do it on that, if I give you an inch, I'm going to take a mile. And then all of a sudden it's going to be, hey, all we have to wear is our pants. And then, hey, we're just going to wear tennis shoes to these. So, own the discipline and, embrace the suck of putting your gear on in the summer. It's not fun. You just have to realize you're going to come to work and you're going to sweat and get it over with early and, take a shower at the end of the day. But, like going back to Sam's model of, pull them aside and have that tough conversation. That's what good leadership does. And kudos to Sam for having that conversation.
Operations Chief, we've talked a lot about discipline here. One of your favorite topics.
Yeah. Yeah. If your life isn't exciting enough, just wake up one morning and say you want to talk about discipline all day long. Good Lord, complacency is there's a million different directions to go with it. I think in all fairness, it happens to everybody. It certainly has happened to me. We can all fall into complacency at various different levels. And I think as a supervisor or a boss in charge of, so my responsibility is to make sure that doesn't occur. And that's the same responsibility that the shift commander and the battalion chiefs and the company officers have. It's a shared responsibility. But my role is to make sure that it doesn't happen, and when it does, that we respond appropriately. So I think the challenge is this, Rick. There's many extremes of complacency. One example would be the Dolphin Cove fire, and again, right, for every line of duty death I talk about, I don't leave any that organizations that I've been in have been responsible for. So it's not pointing the finger elsewhere. But the Dolphin Cove incident in Clearwater Beach was an extreme example of how complacency can make an impact, down to even a smaller level issue. right? A pre-connected hose line that's not connected, ironically, by somebody who wanders the country and teaches about complacency. Nonetheless, these are two extreme levels of complacency that we're all subject to. And so the response is really the challenge. Is it something that can be handled like Sammy talked about, where you just have a conversation with somebody? Most people recognize it, right? When they get called on it, they recognize it. But at the end of the day, the goal is to just try to remind people, yes, we all fall into complacency, but as quick as we fall into it, it's equally as important to make sure we don't live there for any period of time.
I'll throw this in too. One of the things that helps when you do have those conversations is, as you guys know, in this circle, I collect a lot of video. I look at a lot of other fire departments, their alarms, and being able to show them, justify like, hey, I want you to watch this, kind of like what the chief was saying with the Dolphin Cove. You say, you can show them like, this is what's behind the logic. This is what's driving this expectation. And I think most firemen can understand if you provide them with logic.
Yes, I mean, and Larry, correct me if I'm wrong. It's Memphis, wasn't it, where we ran the same building like 6 times that day?
Yeah. Another fascinating report, and I applaud the Memphis Fire Department, who perhaps was the most bold and transparent training that I'd ever seen as a young firefighter. That they put themselves out there. But yeah, Memphis Towers, I believe, was the name. That's a great call, Ricky. That's another fascinating one. Yeah.
And that was before, I'm going to get beat up. I know Larry will beat me up at breakfast on Saturday. That's another one that report was put out before putting reports out was cool, or was the thing to do. I mean, they were way ahead of their time before, a lot of these report things started coming out and were made public, that they made that public and did a phenomenal job. And I mean, that was running the alarm bells each and every time. And I go back to the 80s, when Larry and I both started joining our fire department careers, is that, I had a captain, my very first captain was, we'd run alarm bells 6 times a night at the same place, same office complex. And every time it was full PPE, SCBA, Nomex hood, high-rise packs, forcible entry tools. And we were a 3-person engine company, so, it was him and I carrying lugging all this stuff around. And that's all well and good for me as a young firefighter, because I'm all young and gung ho. But I mean, we had a senior crew also that got to ride with them, and everybody did the same thing. And as Larry stated, at different points in everybody's career, we all get complacent, no matter who you are. And I can tell you I can probably go back through my career and show you my ebbs and flows of when I did not have a good, strong company officer, or a company officer that was more concerned about being my friend than being a company officer. And, I fell off the wagon. I took advantage of it, or I didn't have the intestinal fortitude.
You literally fall off the wagon? Or is that figuratively?
That's figurative. Sorry, my bad. I just Larry, see, now you got me. Now I can't even remember what I was going to say, but it was just Ricky, to the point where how good that company officer was is what that I think is the crucial point. And I started to see that when Chief Schultz and I started talking about training company officers, having good company officer training, is going back and be able to look at some of my evaluations, like Sammy talked about with his firefighter, and going back and look at that and seeing those time periods that I kind of screwed up and wasn't doing things correctly. And it takes a really good, strong, and competent company officer to take, to put that to a friend or somebody that you work with every day. Is that here's the deficiency, here's what you need to correct, and let's move on. That company officer didn't dwell on it. He didn't, keep reminding me of it. It was that here it is, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to move on from here. So Donny, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. I too wanted to piggyback on Larry's thing. I think like you, he brought up a great point saying, that we're all guilty of it. we're all guilty of some level of complacency at some time, whether it's time of year, whether it's time of day, in the evening, at night, we're running back and forth. We're all guilty, but it's recognizing that we're reaching that level of complacency and then addressing it. If you are somebody that's, hey, I never used to be complacent, and now I'm finding myself, I'm hopping off the engine for a car accident. And now the guy on my back step, I forgot to I only wore my running pants last call and didn't put my coat on. Now the guy on the back step's doing that. And, I don't want to question him about it because I wasn't setting a good example. We're all guilty of it. We're all guilty of complacency. And if you are that company officer that does need to have that conversation moving forward, just remember, humility is one of the best things you can show as a company officer. And it might take, hey, let's get everybody in here, and just showing humility on your behalf and saying, hey, I'm as guilty as we all are of, not putting X, Y, and Z on, or not doing this, or not laying out, or, not laying out when I'm supposed to. But moving forward, we're all going to try and do better at this, myself included. So this is my expectation moving forward. Sometimes you just need to pull everybody in and hit the proverbial reset button and say, hey, I'm slacking. We're all slacking. Let's go ahead and hit the reset button and get back to where we need to be. And you can't be afraid to have that conversation as a leader.
Conversations are important. I think that's one of the things that I think the fire service we're kind of lacking on, is having these uncomfortable conversations. I can tell you a story. A couple months ago, I ran a fire in Larry's county, and I knew Larry was far away, and I tell him, the incident commander there, hey man, we got to have all this stuff together by the time the chief gets here, because I don't have one of these uncomfortable conversations with him. So, let's get everything right. Make sure, we got everything documented, everything written down. We know where all our companies are at. All our company officers in the right place. We got the right lines pulled. And, so, we have this conversation, but that's the expectation, is that, hey, Chief Schultz sets out that here's my expectation. I expect it on every one of these incidents. And, one of the big things that I failed in my early career as an ops chief was not making sure that everybody knew those expectations. They were beautiful up here in my head. Right. But, I hadn't spoke about them. I hadn't put them down on a piece of paper so everybody could see what they are. If they're clear and concise and black and white, people will read them. I mean, I certainly believe they'll read them and understand them. And so when you're having those conversations where we've had a failure on the expectations, it's right there for them to go by.
Yeah. If they don't know the mission, Ricky, they'll never be able to accomplish it. And, it doesn't have to necessarily, and we're probably getting down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but it all ties back into complacency with having that tough conversation. It doesn't have to be a formal, all right, boys, let's sit down. We're going to, I want to do a lineup and talk about our complacency. No, it's conversations that happen at 5:30 in the morning when everybody's grabbing their first cup of coffee and just kind of BSing around the kitchen table. When you go out to do a drill and everybody's kind of tied in at once, we're all standing around after the drill, bring up a topic, point at a house and say, hey, what would you do here? And then tie that back into, it's a good thing that house didn't catch on fire last week when we ran it for an automatic fire alarm. And I was, I didn't have, I forgot my hood back at the station. Moving forward, let's do this. So it doesn't always have to be a very formal sit down approach of, hey, this is my expectation, slide the sheet across the table. I want each of you to initial it. There's a time and a place for that, but there's also a time and a place just to get your general expectations. It's kind of a crawl, walk, then run thing. Let's start having those conversations. Then we'll build on this. Then we'll build up. And then obviously, if you work, in a department where discipline's needed, or there's a HR department or anything like that, and you do need to go down the paperwork path, you can do that. But a lot of times, it's just it's covered with a simple conversation. I know, Ricky. I mean, you and I talk 4 times a shift, and a lot of them are tough conversations. You let me know what I'm slacking on. I don't think I've ever even caught you slacking on anything. So, but it's usually, but it's usually the other way around. Hey, did you catch this? Hey, I didn't catch that. But we have those tough conversations once, if not twice, if not 3 times a shift of picking each other up. So.
Yeah, it's usually when I get a text from Edgewater telling me there's a vibra alert going off on the background on that radio transmission.
Sorry, Larry.
So, so Larry, this is, we had a brief discussion about this the other day. So, I mean, all these conversations are nice and everything. And Sammy had, a great example of having a conversation. I mean, when do we got to stop having conversations? I know that's
it is a tough question, and I'm certainly not the most appropriate person to ask, right? I always share with people that self-awareness is a gift, and I try to practice that. And I know that my tendency is to be a bit more on the firm edge. I also like to think that I'm a teacher and somebody who could, as Donny said, have educational conversations versus just a strong reaction, because that's not an appropriate stance to take all the time. There are those extreme situations, I think, Ricky, that require immediate action. And I don't know that these are right, but these are right for me. And what I share amongst my own people is that when I can't leave the incident scene and have a level of comfort that the 3 or 4 people riding on the back step of that rig are going to be watched over for the night. In other words, the officer is going to be in a position to not get somebody foolishly killed or injured, then that requires immediate and probably the highest level action. But those are far and few between after that. I think Donnie's point is spot on, that says holding other people accountable to the standards doesn't require strict and harsh reaction. Sometimes it does. In very few instances, I think it does and should. In others, here's what I think: it takes courage, right? We talked about that. And it takes you giving a crap to do it. So in Sammy's example, if he doesn't give a crap, he doesn't have the conversation. If Donnie's got his battalion, if he doesn't give a crap about his people, then he's not going to waste the energy to have the conversation. And that goes right on to you and everybody else. So I think obviously there are extremes of how to approach it, but I think you look at the officer and you say to yourself, is this an officer that's sleeping at work? Figuratively, they're sleeping on the job. They don't give a crap. They've retired in place. Is that this situation, or is it a really good, competent officer who engages regularly, who knows their job, and just had a moment of complacency lapse in? Those are two very different approaches.
So how would you who we should really have on the show is Sammy's battalion chief. That's who we should have on the show, because how that battalion chief talks to him, that could probably be a very interesting conversation. So Sam, I mean, you've had to have 1 or 2 uncomfortable conversations with your boss.
Yeah, and they haven't all been bad. A battalion chief told me one time, "Hey, I want to congratulate you. We've gone 3 shifts without me getting a phone call." I told him,
"Hey, you got to reward success."
Yeah, I told him, don't expect that to be common.
But I mean, he's not afraid to have a conversation with you, right?
Oh, no. My chief is not afraid to have a conversation with anyone. But I can say, watching him, one of the things that makes his conversations more meaningful is there is no parent deafness. He's just not constantly on guys. If he takes time to have a conversation with you about something, then it's important. And what I mean by parent deafness is if you've got somebody who's just always picking at you and always going after you, then you learn to ignore it a little bit.
I think this is an interesting piece, and I know Donnie. So Donnie and Sam and Ricky, we've all had conversations with each other about operational critiquing. And here's what I know about the 3 of you guys. There's nothing in the world I can say that's going to mess you up more than how you beat your own selves up. Before anybody has a conversation, you guys are saying, I should have done this, I could have done that, I did look at, you're harder on yourself, honestly, than anybody offering some type of feedback is going to be.
No, you're absolutely.
I'm always scared that I'm going to get the phone call. So every call that I go on, I'm trying to check every box, make sure I'm doing everything correctly. Because the day I get a phone call from Chief Schultz and he goes, "What were you thinking?" And then that would be like my worst day ever. So complacency won't come into play because I don't want to get that phone call.
And I think playing off of what Chief Schultz was saying, I will go up to the battalion chief after a fire and say, "Hey, we screwed this up. I recognize it. I can process the logic that drove it, but nonetheless, we're responsible. We messed it up, and it won't happen again. It's being addressed." So a lot of times I'll have that conversation before he has a chance to have it with me. But what's nice is the guys that I work with, that self-awareness piece that Chief Schultz was talking about. We pulled a construction worker out of a hole the other day. Nothing really complicated, but we still could have done some things better. And following it, the tailboard critique, all of the guys are acknowledging areas that they could have performed better. And not only did they address that, but then it started to turn into a what if. And we started looking around the construction site and saying, well, what if this happened? And what if that happened? And so then they start to go down that role and figure out how they could do even better. And so I think that that's the opposite of complacency, is when they're trying to figure out the what if.
Yeah, Sam, I think that's the sign that you have a good crew when they start doing that. And similar to you, the guys that work for me are second to none. Half the time, as they're walking out of the building, I'm trying to get up to them to high five them and tell them how good of a job they just did. And they're automatically leading. I missed this. I don't know. When I said this, did you understand what I was saying? I probably should have worded it differently. Like all good, humility, leaders with humility, they're all their own hardest critic on themselves. So, yeah, Ricky, I know you don't want to let Larry down. I think I heard you give a basement check on an auto fire you came across the other day. So I'd be proud of you for that.
It was in Anne Arundel County, so that's why I want to make sure I got it.
Yeah, get that. Don't miss that. Don't miss that basement check on those. What are the electric cars called? The
Teslas.
The Tesla.
I got a walkout trunk on the rear of the. Yeah, and when we go back there, and Donny, Donny was making not a joke, he's making a comment, but I mean that is to listen to calls, being from this area for so long and watching the influence of a person that cares and a person that wants to do things right is absolutely incredible to listen to Larry's fire department. And I think his company officers, are really driving that. I mean, I think that's a correct statement, Larry. I mean, they are doing a phenomenal job for you.
Yeah, no, there's no question. And look, we all work in a good region, right? We're fortunate to work in this region. And I think the most important part, right? So again, I try to keep this in perspective. Compliance at the end of the day is critical, right? It really is. I think it's also equally as important to understand, right, in the why in this. And I don't know of a region, I could be wrong about this, but I don't know of a region more than the Mid-Atlantic region that has paid such a tragic price for line of duty deaths that occur due to basement fires. Maybe some of the most, maybe not all of them, maybe some of the most preventable deaths by a little bit of a task by accomplishing it. And so again, the Mid-Atlantic region is fire departments from Boston down to Virginia have paid such a tragic price for these basement fires, and that's always going to tug at my heartstring. because of my time spent in the District of Columbia. But again, it's just one of those that all you got to do is have one act of complacency one time and pay such a tragic price for that. Rick, I've got a question, Rick. I can throw it out there. Interested to hear your feedback and Donnie's perspective and Sam's, which I'm hoping all are a little bit different. If you look at the studies in Project Mayday, the highest cohort of firefighters who have had to call Maydays fall into that 6 years to 11 years on the job range. I think in that like high percentage, right? 30 as the highest percentage groups. Just say 6 years to 11 years, 6 years to 15 years. In almost like by more than 100 in other groups. Again, 6 years to 15 years, if you use that number. What are your thoughts on that data?
Sam or Donnie?
Yeah, I'll go first, and it's pretty simple. I think it's just confidence. I think it's overconfidence. I almost don't like the cliche saying that you don't know what you don't know, but it's really true, and it has a lot of merit. I think you get that 6 years on, you're starting to feel a little bit confident that you can make some decisions and operate on the fire ground. Whereas, when you're a year on, you're looking to your officer for just about everything, right? You're expecting him to tell you how to do every single task and make sure that you do it right. You start to get to that 6 to 15 year mark, and you're starting to get a little more confident that you've got the fire ground figured out. You've been to some fires now, and we have a little bit of that overconfidence, particularly if you're not paying attention to what's going on around the country and seeing where people are getting jammed up, seeing where things don't go correct.
Sam, you hit the nail on the head for what I wanted to bring up, but I think it's, you've had enough time on a job where you have run a couple fires. There's now a younger guy or girl beneath you that you can kind of preach some of your lessons onto, and hey, everything up to this point has gone well. So you do slack a little bit. That middle of the night, when you talk about that Project Mayday, when you talk about the timing, again, a little bit of a rabbit hole, but kind of tie it all back together. When you talk about the timing of day that call comes out, when most of our Maydays are, and Larry, correct me if I'm wrong, it's 2 to 4:30, right? 2 to 4:30 a.m. or
early
somewhere
morning.
in that. Somewhere in that early, right? So when we talk about, hey, why, to understand, the needs of complacency, we have to understand the why of why we're preaching what we're preaching. So when we say, hey, I want you to wear your coats, pants, and helmets to an automatic fire alarm, and well, why do we do that? Well, we just do it. We do it that way. If we pull up and it's off, we're quicker. It's not necessarily that we're quicker. It's because we're developing those routines of getting dressed. I just had the opportunity to speak at a local jurisdiction's OCS class, and we went over some of that, the why of what we do and creating a pattern. When you talk about that Project Mayday and you talk about complacency, when the bells go off at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm barely awake. My heart rate goes from 55 beats a minute as I'm sleeping to 160 immediately. Whether you want to realize it or not, your body's dumping some fight or flight hormones in there that's trying to get you to wake up and trying to get your brain to kick into almost like a caveman state to go on this fight that you're going on. And with that, we get several different body movements that are working against us. We get auditory exclusion, we get shunting in our core. With that, our bodies are front sight focused. We're not really going to see it. So as I'm going down the road and I've already been complacent with some of my actions, now I'm, the complacency of me trying to catch up to it is I forget my flashlight. I forget to switch the radio to the right channel because I haven't been wearing a radio on these calls. So we, more than anything, not be complacent. We have to get our reps and our routine in so that when I am going down the road at 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm half asleep, my body is almost doing it as a routine to catch up for what my mind isn't telling me what to do. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And Donny, again, to go along with, because I think they're all tied in and it's an important piece. And I'm gonna use your words because you said it's important to understand the why. So again, for the three of you guys, we talk a lot about building muscle memory and patterns. So if you had to explain to somebody why that's important, why is it important to build muscle memory? Why is it important to build patterns? And a lot of this is, I know Sam's got his class on at FDIC, common fire ground errors, where much of what Sam talks about is the root cause of some of these areas. But again, why is it, in your words, that building muscle memory in those core basic skills are so critical? And again, it's a group question.
Yeah, I always revert back to whether we want to realize it or not, our bodies and our brains are subconsciously doing things for us or against us that help us and hurt us. Just like I said before, developing that muscle memory so that when, whether we want to realize it or not, I talk about, pulse point's a perfect example. If anybody has pulse point out there, every time pulse point goes off, whether you're on duty or off duty, you assimilate that sound to a box alarm. So when I'm at work and pulse point goes off, my body dumps norepi and dopamine and tries to get my mind and my body ready to go down the road at 100 miles an hour. Same thing happens when I'm off duty, whether I want to realize it or not. If I'm off duty and I have my phone on and pulse point goes off, I could be walking through the grocery store. I might not realize it. I just pick up my phone and I look at it and look at the address, but my body's going fire, 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 and it's dumping these things. Along with that, chemical response your body's getting, like I said before, you're getting all the body responses that go along with fight or flight. Again, whether you realize it or not, your body is shunting. You're getting some auditory exclusion. You're getting tunnel vision. Whether you're on duty or off duty, with that comes mistakes because literally our blood is rushing to our core to shunt. So developing that muscle memory so that I can sit there while my heart rate's beating 125 miles an hour. I'm trying to focus on this. I'm trying to focus on that. But I have the muscle memory that says, hey, when this sound goes off, I need to do X, Y, and Z. I'm not playing catch up. It's already there. It's there. And, it's ready to rock and roll. And I mean, the ultimate answer to the why of that, you have to sign up for Drilling at the Speed of Flashover by Scott Kraut at FDIC and come figure it out why.
I
see that tie?
Now I see. Now it's time to take away from Sam Hittle at the expense of the training. Sam and Ricky, your thoughts?
So I wanted to kind of go back to where we started before we went to this question. Let me go back to Donny. So Donny said that, you talk about, the fire alarm and stuff like that. So it has the word fire in it, so, we should treat it like it's a fire because we're going to wear our fire helmet, our fire coat, our fire pants, and our fire boots. It's a fire alarm, an auto fire, any kind of fire, we should be wearing our full ensemble. So, we decide when it's not a fire anymore, not by the building dictating to us that it's got nothing showing or we've got nothing in the hallway, drop some of that stuff. We'll go search for it. The buildings dictate if it's going to be on fire or not. The buildings are a lot tighter than they used to be. They can contain the fire. You open up one door and you can have a fire and you got to be ready to go because you just be doing the citizens and yourselves an injustice by not being ready. And then to go back to what Larry was talking about the, these line of duty deaths and these injuries that have occurred in the Northeast region of the country is that, and why departments not necessarily the departments that have had the line of duty death, but the departments that, you know, it's because they haven't paid the price, and they don't. I don't think they know. They don't know what that price is. You know, it's deep. I mean, Larry, I know that Cherry Road still affects you. I mean, you know, Kenny Hedrick still affects me every day. You know, both basement fires, and you know, I think we strive each day to go, this can't happen on my watch. It can't happen on my tour duty. You know, so we're gonna make ourselves correct each time we go out the door, and people just think it's not going to happen to them because you're not the DC fire department. You know, you're not the Wichita. You know, these big fire departments. You know, that only happens to them. You know, and that, what a false sense of, you know, that's just a false sense to have. You know, all the way around is that it's not going to happen to you. I mean, read these line of duty death reports from NIOSH, and I have to look up some of these towns on Google Map or, you know, iMaps to figure out where they're at. It's not a big city. Yeah. And, you know, I said this a couple months ago, I think on one of the shows, and I don't think it resonated with anybody, is that, you know, we have this tragic incident, whatever it is. So, I mean, I in one of my old helmets that I have in my office at home, I still have a Cherry Road sticker on there. You know, I didn't know why, when I put that sticker on there, I didn't know why I put it on there, other than that Ed Smith worked at Engine 10 and we were so close to the DC Fire Department. You know, as I've grown older, now I know everything there is to know about that fire, from you, you know, from the recreation of the fire, you know, with Dan, and, you know, now all those lessons learned have to be applied to every call that we go on. And you talk about that 6 to 11 years, is that it's that, hey man, I've been to a couple basement fires, nothing really bad's happened. And, you know, so what's really the point of doing all this running around the building, checking the basement? Because the last 3 we've been to, nothing bad's happened. You know, so it's just, I don't know. You just have to learn from these tragedies, and you got to apply them every day. And that's part of not being complacent, because, you know, as soon as you go out the door, when I hear a basement fire, I'm thinking of Kenny Hedrick. You know, I'm thinking of, you know, Cherry Road. I'm thinking of all those out there, and go, this can't happen to us again. You know, and it's just guiding that company officer. You know, if you're in a chief officer role, it would be, you know, if Sammy pulls up as a company officer to this building, and, you know, there's 1,000 things going on, and Sammy's trying to address all those as that first arriving company officer. You know, my duty and job as a command officer or responding officer is to help guide him, you know, to make sure that he identifies all these critical factors and make sure he doesn't, you know, have a mistake on the fire ground. I mean, it's a team thing. You know, it can't, you know, we've talked about having difficult conversations. We've talked about discipline, but if that team isn't working together, you know, then, you know, that we're setting ourselves up for failure. Sammy, you're on the edge of your seat. So.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's not about what has happened. It's about what could happen. It's about the potential. And then a lot of times we only recognize the potential by looking around us, as the fire service as a whole, and looking outside the walls of our own department. So I think you're spot on. And Chief Schultz, what, you know, Donny was implying or referring to was the dual process theory, that if we do something consistently enough, then it becomes habit, to the point that it actually becomes instinctive or automatic. So if I'm so conditioned to put on my gear and grab the same tools every time, then I don't have to allocate any of my cognitive process to making those decisions. It becomes implicit knowledge, or that tacit knowledge that allows me to focus on those critical priorities that I'm now going to have to make decisions based on.
And perfect. And I think you and Donnie said it perfectly. So again, I think it's important, right? The point of my questions is to say that task proficiency, which is important to all of us, I hope, can't live in an environment of complacency, right? They can't live together. And so you're talking about physiologically why it's important to be task proficient. You and Donnie were saying this is why you create muscle memories. So I'm going to ask a little bit more and say, so what? What does that mean to the average company officer or the average firefighter, right? You talked about bandwidth, and Donny, you talked about the importance of habit and muscle memory. But what's the so what to that? Still, I'm a backstep firefighter. I'm a company officer. What does that have to do with my job personally?
So that means we're going to train we're going to train the way we perform to that standard, right? When we do go out and train, we're going to train in full PPE. When I do go and pull a hose line, I'm not going to end it with, I'm just stretching a dry hose line to the front door and then I throw it on the ground and I drop my pack. No, we're going to stop. We're going to call for water. We're going to go over that signal of calling for water. We're going to put our mask on, and then we're going to stretch that charged hose line, even if it's just into the lobby, through that building to work on that, because, that's all part of it as well. Prime example of kind of bad training, and I think we brought it up before, of bad training leading to bad habits on the fire ground is, I know it's happened to me. I'm sure any of you that have, had a brand new rookie that's come through the modern day ISTA manual
investigation too. Engine.
That's had the modern day rookie come through, the XYZ manual of fireground books. Everything they're taught in the academy is, hey, we're lighting these burn rooms off. We're lighting these burn rooms off, and we're going to stretch in there, but we don't want to put it out all the way because we have a next group of rookies that we have to cycle through and we have to keep these fires going. So, what do? They stretch in there, they open the line for about 2 seconds, they shut it down, they turn around, they look, they get the approval, they switch, that guy opens the line. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, I've actually had a rookie stretch into a working garden apartment fire. We get to the seat of the fire and he opened the line up for all of 2 seconds and then shut it down and turned around and looked at me, because that's what his body's been conditioned to. Right. That's what his muscle memory throughout his time at the academy has conditioned him to. And that was something that it never really fully resonated with me until I watched it happen on a real live fire ground. And I had taught at the academy, and that's the way I taught. And then we finally came back and said, hey, we're not doing ourselves any favors here. If we have to get extra pallets, if we have to switch burn rooms, that's what we're going to have to do. But we're creating muscle memory and we're creating habits that are complacent, that are going to get people killed. And Sam, I'm going to pass it on to you. Sam turned me on to a great book called On Combat by Colonel Grossman, and it talks about your body's response to a lot of the stuff. And I know, Sam, I simulate that to On Combat's version of, the officer with the shells in his hand being shot dead, if you remember that specific incident. But what do you think, Sam?
Yep. I think that everything you said is absolutely right, but the why the chief asked about, it's pretty simple to me, and it might come off harsh, but it's because we said we would. It's because when we sat there and sat in that interview and they asked if we would perform the job, we said we would. And the citizens expect us to do it, because they don't have a 912. They get one phone call, they get one response. They don't get to choose who's coming, nor do we get to choose what companies support us. So it really comes down to, we have to do things right so we can perform effectively on the fire ground for them and for us. It's that simple.
Larry, you good with those answers?
Yeah.
I'm gonna.
Again, I think it's easy to just talk about complacency and why it's bad. I think 99% of the people in the fire service know complacency is bad. Again, it really is tying it into why, and I really appreciated their answers. That at the end of the day, it's about task proficiency. Every company wants to be great, right? It's about task proficiency, and we build muscle memory by not being complacent. And muscle memory is what carries our decision-making process in the varying environment and the complex changes that occur minute to minute on every fire ground, right? If I don't make sense of it, I can't respond appropriately to it. I just take some mechanical action and hope that'll work. It was good. Thank you.
Hey, Ricky, can I add one more Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just want to make sure, I want to pledge my promise to Larry that I'm going to learn some bigger words for next month's show so I can be at the Sam and Donny level.
Dual processing is a computer, Rick.
It all comes down to photosynthesis with Sam on the fire ground. So, hey, and Chief Schultz, when you talk about, go back to having those tough conversations about complacency, and this is just something that came to my mind. A lot of it is the sale of how you bring it up. We brought up, Prince George's County, when I first came on, it was notorious, in my opinion, for truck drivers, special service drivers throwing on a helmet and a pair of gloves, and everything on the outside of the house that got done in a helmet and a pair of gloves. And a driver on my shift, a house fire, this is a couple years ago now. Same thing. He throws on a helmet and a pair of gloves, and I gotta go. I'll see you guys.
That's the Purge, man.
There's an air
What's going on over there? It's the Purge.
I don't know. I hadn't come across yet.
That right there is probably a perfect example. I think if you could finish that out, if our chauffeurs of the trucks were doing that, then I would simply go to the data and show them that how many people are found in the back doors of a house. We expect our outside vent to pop the Charlie side door on their 360 and at least sweep that egress. And we found a lot of victims that way. And that's the logic that I would use to justify why I would expect that outside vent truck chauffeur to be fully dressed and capable of going in a window or a door.
Oh, gotcha. So we're kind of, we're just kind of winding down here on the time here. And I wanted to, it's going to be a kind of different field this year at FDIC. So, if you're going to go out there, Chief Schultz kind of alluded to it, but Sammy, what's your class that you're doing out there? And what are you shaking your head about? You're doing a class.
Yeah, well, I had a partner, but now I'm going to I wonder if he's going to show up because it became my class all of a sudden.
Hey, he's not a dumb man by a far stretch. Let's get that straight away.
I got your back, Sam. But look, honestly, man, when Sam Hittle walks into a room with that bow tie on, he captivates the audience, and they don't see anybody else but Sam Hittle. They're waiting for some 600 slide PowerPoint to pop up, and then to actually watch him get through 600 slides in 1 hour is even more fascinating.
I mean, that's as long as he's standing on that tier thing. You're seeing Sammy.
Is it more fascinating than when I order my meals? Because you always seem to stop and watch.
Oh, how the human body processes when chewing is still fascinating.
So what day is your class, Sammy?
We're going to be on Wednesday at 1:30.
At 1:30. I think that's the same time that I'm on. So, and then Chief Schultz, right. You got your
Rick. Don't skip yourself. What do you got going on this year, Rick?
Well,
very topic of complacency.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it all depends if I can make the trip. So we'll see what the doctor says. So, but I mean, so it is. It's more or less. It's the cornerstone program from Traditions Training that was written by a lot of instructors. 2 of them or 3 of them were on this program today. It is a really, truly, it is a program that just addresses complacency and addresses, how we should act. And I don't think anybody maliciously goes out and tries to act badly. It's just a kind of reminder of how we're supposed to operate on fire grounds to service the public. Because I think sometimes we forget exactly why we're here. And it is, like Sammy alluded to earlier, it's to serve the public. And sometimes I think we get caught up in our firehouse world and our fire truck world. And we realize that, we get there and we're in half dressed or whatever, and it turns out to be a fire and we've already failed the public. We didn't lay a supply line. We didn't do a basement check. Not only did we fail the public, then we failed our fellow firefighters. So it's just a matter of just kind of reviewing that. Look, Bill Carey, really opened my eyes here in the last year, along with Chief Schultz. Just, we understand that we're all from the Northeast region except for Sammy, but we certainly know how he operates, and we understand how people don't operate all the same. And so you got to kind of understand, how you can take these practices and thought processes that we're going to give you in the classes, whether it be Sammy's class, whether it be Chief Schultz's classes, and just try to see if you can use them in your system. And just don't walk around with blinders on, just because that's what goes on in your geographic area. Be open to different ideas, be open to different ways to do things. And if you can make them work, man, what a phenomenal thing if you can learn something. If I can learn something from Wichita, which I have, and be able to apply it in a fire department that I'm currently operating at that hadn't thought of that process. So yeah, do you, but go ahead. I'm sorry, Chief, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, Sammy, it looks like somebody on the Facebook line likes your hat. Who doesn't? It's either the hat or the bow tie that gets them. I don't know. And the glasses. And Nick Salima, an old friend from Arlington County, he had a great comment to add, and it's certainly worth reinforcing. Says that continual training speeds your process without limiting the quality of work. And I think that's the important piece when we talk about mastery and proficiency. It's not just for the sake of being master at something or being proficient. By doing that, it allows us to work on the fireground environment, which is fast moving, fast changing, complex, stressors coming out of everywhere. And it allows you to perform at that level in spite of those things, as opposed to making those things excuses for not performing to the highest level. So Nick, thanks for throwing that in there. That's a great piece.
And I would piggyback on that and say that training, we get complacent in our training to just say that we had done some training or to meet the hours. If we don't set up our training correctly, then we can actually give ourselves a false sense of security of what's going to work and what's not. And so we actually train ourselves to be complacent.
And we can use that word, what is that word, that we always hear, I don't know about, I know me and Larry, but I know we use it. Oh, we're a target solutions fire department. That's how we get our training. And I think what a cop out that must be is that you as a company officer can't take the training that is pushed down, not pushed down, but is given to you as a monthly assignment and take that and deliver it to your company with meaning. Not just a checkbox. And I agree and have read this. Any kind of training is good. You have to own it and you have to deliver it to your firefighters. I mean, believe me, no chief officer, no training officer just goes, what can I push down today? It's a matter of, what's going on in the department, what needs to be covered. And, it's up to that company officer. Once again, like we stressed earlier, how important that company officer is to making that highly proficient company, each and every time they go out on a call. So. All right. It is straight up 2:00. So we spent our 1 hour. And Sammy, we're going to see you in a couple weeks. Is that you are going to show up, right? You're just not going to leave Larry holding the bag there?
Or? I don't know. I might go to your class.
Sam is on the. Need I remind you, Sam is on the board of directors. FDIC doesn't happen without Sam Hittle.
And look, Sam is picking me out a bow tie from my class.
I thought you were going to get a Maryland one.
Yeah, that's right. I was going to get a Maryland bow tie for my class, just so I can be like Sam. So, but hey, look, we're going to wrap up, and I can't thank Sammy Hittle, Donny Fletcher, and Chief Schultz enough for coming on today. We always appreciate fire engineers giving us this opportunity to get our views and opinions out, and hopefully you can take it back, take pieces back from each what one of us talked about, and hopefully make it applicable to your department and make your operation better. That's all we really care about is the operation being good. So from all of us at Traditions Training, from Fire Engineering, the Clarion Events Group, and Chief Bobby Halton, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next month. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, thanks, Ricky.